As we think about point of view this week in creative writing and think about its usage in fiction, I want to look at a couple stories from Bonnie Jo Campbell's collection, Mothers Tell Your Daughters, and look at how point of view is used in contrasting ways there to help build the tensions and the conflicts within the stories. And the first story we'll look at is Mothers Tell Your Daughters, which uses first-person narration. There's an I narrator, a mother who's dying, who is telling the story. There's also a you present in the story, but the you never really acts or even really hears the story that's being told to her. The mother is on her deathbed, and the frame that is set up within this story is that she's confessing what she thinks of as her failures in her life, and is unapologetic about a lot of things within the story. The effect of the story, though, is that she's speaking to her daughter, but she's speaking in her own head. She's not really speaking to or conversing with her daughter. Instead, she's kind of trapped, and the confession is not being spoken, but is merely being thought. So it's kind of interesting what kind of character emerges from that. A silent confession, one that is that can't be spoken, and that isn't spoken. So does she really kind of transact her sense of guilt or her sense of meaning in the story? It's an interesting tension that's set up there within this first person narration, that the you never hears the confession and never forgives or never finds a point of connection with the first person who's speaking in the story. So I wanted to look at a couple moments in the story and think about how point of view reinforces the story's central tensions in that regard. Near the bottom of page 86 in the story, we get the narrator who announces this confessional intent. She says in that last paragraph, "Now I'm dying in this house I was born in, dying with no wine, no cigarettes, no laughing or singing. The snow's falling outside today, but with this oxygen running, they won't even let me light my wood stove. Much as I loved the smell of burning oak and cherry last week, even with the lung cancer and morphine, I was speaking my mind, talking circles around every man and woman to prove I was not a fool, and I was still arguing with you. But now I'm lucky if I can spit out a word an hour. I've got a head full of stories you need to hear, starting with my ribs, ending with my whole life." And so this is kind of the confessional frame that is the basis of the story. The woman is trying to confess. She's got a head full of stories, but she can't spit out the words in the end. So what tensions start to develop within the story as you read it, from the fact that she's trying to confess or she's trying to make herself understood, but she struggles. Another section that's worth thinking of here in terms of the point of view is how the voice of the narrator emerges within the language itself of the story. There's a beautiful paragraph on page 93 near the top, where she's speaking about her attachment to men throughout her life. It's a great list. Near the top of page 93, she writes, "Men's machines still sing to me, revving chainsaw, motorboat, log splitter, rototiller, leaf blower, generator, humming, cordless drill, rattletrap, tractor, power washer, hedge trimmer, biting grinder, motorcycles with mufflers torn off, diesel trucks chugging in the driveway. You remember those men who came to me after a fishing trip up north and filled my wringer washer with smelt. Come out with us and play, men used to call, like tomcats, and out I went. That old wringer washer was never the same after all them fish. The men who came around never passed up an easy target, so they killed all the rabbits. I meant to sew a blanket from the soft skins to replace my own skin, which I imagine wadded up under a bed in my room, smeared with menstrual blood, stiff with sperm, stretched by pregnancy. For years I had warmed myself in the borrowed skins of men. I was good at cutting pelts from flesh, muscle from bone." So in this sense, the narrator's voice clearly emerges, her sense of participation in that world, and yet her sense of regret and loss in some ways of what she's lost there. But is she apologetic or not about it? That's one of those central tensions that kind of comes out of the way that the story's told. And of course, as you read the story, one of the things that that's central to the conflicts here is that the mother recognizes that she's allowed her daughter to be molested, and how she lives with that reality is central to the way the story is told. She makes that that kind of stunning confession on page 89 that men mess with girls in this life. They always have and always will. That sense of that is that sense of violence and sexual assault is a foundational history to this world, and how the narrator lives with that reality. So what emerges here in the story is a central tension between what she can say and what she can't say. She recognizes her culpability in the story, but she can't confess it to her daughter, and so there's no kind of guilt or forgiveness that gets transacted in the story. Note this passage at the top of 98. The surgery to remove my first cancer was nothing. Such a fuss they made over a tumor the size of a pinto bean. I didn't see your face behind the mask. I told the doctor as I came out from under the drugs I wouldn't recognize you in a lineup of men wielding knives. With morphine, it's sometimes hard to untangle what's happened. I hope I didn't contract a virus while I was lying there open. I told one of the men, my husband or the cancer surgeon or my rapist. My insides exploded like that. I might have caught something that turned into the cancer that's killing me now. Do not move during radiation treatment, men in masks told me. Lie still with your eyes closed. You say that when Bill Thoreau stood in the doorway of your room, you closed your eyes and lay still, and you never opened them until he left. But you say he didn't have sex with you, so what's the big deal? I was raped behind the lamplighter, but I had better things to do than to get bent out of shape for about 10 minutes of my life. I didn't want to testify in court about my private business, and I didn't want my name in the Gazette. Your daddy got all pumped up, promised me I'll find the guy myself and kill him. But as far as I know, he didn't even look. The realities of this character that emerge from the way that she tells her life and the recognitions that she makes in her own head as she tries to, make this kind of deathbed confession to her daughter really define the character here. They set up the basic conflicts that the character feels within herself, and for how she excuses her life or how she tries to find forgiveness for it, and how she lives with the realities of the sexual violence that has defined her and her daughter's life as well. In comparison, look at the third-person narration in Somewhere Warm, a story we have that is kind of a triangle that's set up between the mother, Sherry, a truck driver who comes into her life as a love interest, and her daughter, Izzy, teenage daughter, Izzy. This story is told in third person, so we don't get a first-person narrator. We move between kind of the Sherry's perspective and the truck driver's perspective, and get a bit of a glimpse into Izzy's perspective as well at times. But we never go deeply into any of those characters and how they respond to the events of the story. As the truck driver runs off with Izzy in the end and leaves Sherry. This third-person narration sets up Sherry's consciousness within the story. It begins with her consciousness. It ends with her consciousness of the world. And one of the kind of interesting things that develops there is her sense of distance from the events of the story, how she finds a way of understanding her daughter's betrayal with the truck driver, how she understands the succession of men who have left her, and how she tries to find a sense of meaning to the word love as her life has gone on, as she reflects on her past. So we can take a look at a couple passages from this story and rethink how the point of view and the choices Campbell's made as author reinforces the conflicts and tensions that are within this story, Somewhere Warm. First, when you think about how point of view reinforces Sherry as a character, we don't go deeply into her history. We just get glimpses of her past and how she understands it. At the beginning of the story, on page 155, her ex-husband tells her openly, "You make me feel damned inadequate," as he leaves her. You find Sherry is always kind of works with is always working with a kind of sentimentalized sense of love that she has definitions of love that she's done in needlework and have put on the wall. So you get a sense of love through 1 Corinthians chapter 13 on page 157, and her daughter always kind of rails against that biblical and sentimentalized sense of love that Sherry longs for. But she tries to understand love throughout the story, and by the end of the story, as she looks at the note that Izzy leaves when she's run off with the truck driver boyfriend, notes that Sherry never used the word love lightly in the end. So she's trying to understand Izzy's decision, trying to understand the truck driver's betrayal. We also get his perspective on this moment, right? That when he looks over at Izzy, he thinks about it, about being seduced by her or seducing her, that it's about the wrongest thing that I've ever done, he says on page 160. But then that doesn't change him in any way, shape, or form, right? That he stays with Izzy and then runs off with her in the end. On page 162, about a third of the way down the page, the paragraph begins, "The truck driver put his arm around Sherry again." This is after he slept with Izzy, but kept watching Izzy and was surprised to discover the head-on guilt was not unbearable. Instead, it made him giddy, made objects around him sparkle all the rest of the day. Lunch tasted as good as filet mignon, though it was fried bologna, the school skipper's favorite, fried bologna on untoasted white bread slathered with melting salad dressing. At dinner, he devoured a good amount of Sherry's macaroni with ham casserole before it could even cool. Then the next day, he ends up back in bed with Izzy, and they run off together, eventually leaving Sherry to wonder about the meaning of love. If this story were told outside of kind of the plain third person that Campbell adopts, the story could become very melodramatic, or there could be kind of a moral to the story that develops at the end. Instead, on page 170, you end up with this moment of epiphany or insight that Sherry seems to have, right? That she looks down at this baby in her lap from Izzy and starts to think about what love means. This is at 170 near the top. School wasn't Sherry's biggest concern, not really. Her concern was that maybe her life had all been a foolish waste, that the trajectory away from her own cruel mother had brought her right back to this howling creature on her lap. Somebody would have to watch the baby while Isabel went back to school, and if there was really any point, the girl would need to get a driver's license and a car if Sherry wasn't going to have to do everything for her. And they charge hundreds of dollars now for driver's training, which she's supposed to quit smoking for that. So this kind of reality that Sherry comes face to face with in the end. The sense of love not as ethereal or otherworldly, but love as the kind of thing that defines the transactions of guilt and failure and loss that each of us experiences within life. Through third person, Campbell explores those things and brings us some wonderful characters in this story, as brutal as the world that she describes is.